Ronnie Stanley calls out the referees. Isaiah Likely and Roquan Smith taunt the Chiefs after the Baltimore Ravens Week 1 loss. We talk about that, what they said, and so much more. Coming up next here on this edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every day. We're free and available for you all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, audio form, wherever you get your show. So be sure to hit that like button, subscribe button, follow button. Really appreciate that. We also do, again, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. That's our regularly scheduled content, but also we go live after every single Ravens game like we did last night, or I guess earlier this morning because the game ended pretty late last night, but we go live after every single Ravens game. If you want to check that out, absolutely feel free to do so. We go live after every piece of Ravens big news as well, and we have a lot more Ravens coverage too. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens brought to you by PrizePicks. The easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. PrizePicks, run your game. Full disclosure, I recorded an entire episode of this just a couple minutes ago. Just finished that up. And then kind of thinking about it, I realized, Kevin, you didn't talk about any of the key points that need to be talked about. Now, obviously, from a game perspective, I did. There was some late-breaking developments over the course of the past couple of hours. Full disclosure, it's 4:30 in the morning right now. And I didn't really talk about those. Isaiah Likely, Roquan Smith taunting the Chiefs, Ronnie Stanley calling out the refs. And so what I decided to do is I'm going to just record this episode now. This will be the Friday episode. And then we're going to put out the other recording on Saturday. So we talked about positives, areas of concern, all that pretty general stuff. So that'll come out tomorrow. But today I want to talk about what Ronnie Stanley had to say, Isaiah Likely, Roquan Smith, because those were some late breaking stories. Maybe you're waking up to it with me here. Maybe I'm breaking the news to you, or you saw it, went to bed, woke up, and now we're talking about it here. So no flaming me on the shirt, no roasting me. All right. I recorded these episodes back to back, so I'm not wearing the same shirt multiple days in a row. So when you see the episode come out tomorrow, it will be the same shirt. So no flaming me on the shirt, all right? I'm doing this. I value getting the biggest stories out, right? That's what we do here on Locked On Ravens. I'm going to talk about the game a lot. We'll talk about takeaways in the final part of the show and just a general overview of the game. But I did really just want to dive into this. And, even though it's kind of flipping things around, that's what happens in the content game sometimes, and I love it. So we're talking about what happened with both Ronnie Stanley, Isaiah Likely, Roquan Smith. Let's start with Ronnie Stanley. Look, we know the refs were a big part of the game last night. No one can sit here and tell me they weren't. Now, I'm not a person who just wants to say, oh, the refs are the reason the Ravens lost the game. I'm not that type of person personally. All right? I think that the Ravens or any team, don't put yourself in the situation to have the refs win or lose you the game. But when the refs have fingerprints on the game, you have to talk about it. And when the refs have fingerprints on the game, you have to acknowledge they were a part of the reason why a certain team won or lost. And so, to me, the refs can be a part of the reason, but they can't be the only reason. And I think that last night, the refs were a reason. A reason. Now, Ronnie Stanley ended up talking about the refs after the game and kind of was talking about how he was, and the Ravens were told one thing during the offseason. But then in the game last night, that wasn't really held up. They were calling it differently. That's tough when, you ask questions, right? The officiating, Ronnie Stanley didn't feel like it was consistent, which I also agree. We'll get into that. But if you're, getting talked to in the offseason and you're like, oh, okay, doing things good, right? He says they got clarification in the offseason on expectations, but that didn't seem consistent with what was being called in the game. Obviously, apparently, the illegal formations that happened are a big emphasis point. They're a big emphasis point, and that's fine. But call it both ways if you're going to do it. And Ronnie Stanley, making it very clear that they were told one thing, and then the other thing happened. And then on the other side, Jawan Taylor, who was, again, just leaning back on every play, and that's a your false starting there, essentially. He's also lining up in the backfield, kind of like what Ronnie Stanley was doing. Honestly, a little more egregious. And it wasn't called. The Ravens had 5 legal formation penalties total. The Chiefs had none. So Ronnie Stanley calling out the refs here. Honestly, good for him. I think that, look, refs have to be held accountable. If it's a new thing they're dealing with, okay, but then call it both ways. If Ronnie Stanley's getting penalized for him and then Jawan Taylor's getting penalized right back, there'd be no issue. It'd be annoying, but it's like, okay, if you're calling it that way, if that's the way the league is going to call it this year, then that's fine if you're doing it both ways. It's like in baseball, where an umpire will have one strike zone for one team and another strike zone for another team. And that's not fair. It's not something you do. The game is being officiated the wrong way. And we saw John Harbaugh talking to the officials, giving them an earful during the game about how the game wasn't being called consistently, wasn't being called on both sides that way. And it's tough to kind of go through that because you're getting penalized for things the other team is not. And that's tough. It's something that teams shouldn't have to deal with. It's either you call it one way and then you call it that way for the other team too, or you don't call it at all. It's not one way for one team and another way for another team. That's one of the big frustration points. It would not be an issue if the Chiefs also got called for those plays. And people will look at the box score and they'll say, well, Kevin, the Chiefs had 6 penalties and the Ravens had 7. Guess what? It was not the same types of penalties. You could even talk about the plays that were not called penalties for the Chiefs. One that apparently just has no punishment whatsoever. Steve Spagnuolo running down the sideline and calling a timeout when assistant coaches are not allowed to do that. The head coach is the one that does that. Now, apparently Andy Reid was calling a timeout or something, and he was acknowledged, and then Spagnuolo's running down the sideline anyway. Like, what's he doing? He's trying to call the timeout. He's trying to do it. And you could see him walking back to Andy Reid and saying, kind of like patted him on the shoulder, like, my bad, I'm sorry. And then the ref comes up to Spagnuolo and Reid and says, you can't do that. Now, I haven't seen any footage of Andy Reid actually calling the timeout. I've seen a couple of people who either were there or just say that Andy Reid called it. But the thing that's being shown is Steve Spagnuolo, an assistant coach, is calling a timeout when you are not allowed to do that from the sideline like that. And it just goes unchecked. It goes unpunished. So we'll see what ends up happening, see if any footage comes out or what happens. But the fact of the matter is, okay, well, then what was Steve Spagnuolo doing? What was he doing? He was trying to call a timeout. Doesn't excuse the fact that he was trying to do it, right? Even if Andy Reid was trying to do it, he was unsuccessful, and he's trying to get somebody's attention. Spagnuolo can't go down and do it for him. And that's what happened, right? There was an egregiously soft ticky-tack hold call on Tyler Linderbaum that negated a 30-yard Lamar, technically 29, all right? I'll take off the extra yard. 29-yard Lamar Jackson run. It was just all that stuff. But Ronnie Stanley, I think he has a point here of like, look, if you're told one thing in the offseason, you're like, all right, yeah, this is within the realm of what we're looking for here. You're doing this the right way. And whatever that conversation was, I don't know what the conversation was, but whatever it was, and then the literal opposite thing happens and it costs you yards. What was it? 3 on the first drive, 3 in a row? It was either 4 on the first drive and 3 in a row, or 3 on the first drive, 3. I can't remember exactly. It was just so many of them. It's unreal. But you have to call it both ways. You have to do it, especially in a professional league, biggest league on earth in football. And you're not calling a game both ways. Is he being made an example of, right? That's something that got brought up. Like, is he being made an example of? That's a big conversation point. Was that something that happened? Lamar Jackson even said, seemed like every time he made a big play, a flag is down. I mean, it was true. Now, again, there were legit penalties the Ravens committed. I'm not saying they are free of all sin and they didn't commit any penalties. They did. That roughing the passer on Nnamdi Madubuike, yeah, I mean, it was a soft roughing the passer call, but textbook, you're not allowed to, his hands to the face of a quarterback, even if you're not slamming his head into the ground or anything. Textbook, I'll let that one slide. Even though it was kind of soft, it's spot. You can't put your hand on the head of a quarterback. You'll get called for it. So I'll give that one by Madubuike a pass. But then it's like Jawan Taylor's also leaning back for false starts like I talked about. Like every single play it's happening, they're not calling it. The only false start they called on him was the one where he was moving and everybody else wasn't. The obvious one. There was, I think, a makeup call on Marcus Williams when he went low on Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, for the one that, Roquan said Mahomes flopped. It was a pretty late hit out of bounds. Out of the two, I would have probably called the Roquan one and not the Marcus Williams one. But again, it's just the refereeing was super inconsistent. Not saying it's the only reason the Ravens lost. They did enough of that themselves. They had plenty of mistakes and plenty of concern areas. So we'll dive into that, and we did for tomorrow's episode. But Ronnie Stanley and Lamar Jackson, these other guys calling out the refs and not really, happy. John Harbaugh, not happy with the way that this game went from that side of things. Coming up in the second part of the show, Isaiah Likely and Roquan Smith taunted the Chiefs. So be sure to stay tuned. We have a lot to dive into on this episode of Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by LinkedIn. And when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. So for me, I've had a ton of great experiences over on LinkedIn, whether it's finding jobs, networking, connecting. LinkedIn has it all. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, might not be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 7% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL, LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We return our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Friday after the Ravens lose 27-20 to the Chiefs in week 1 in heartbreaking fashion. Appreciate everybody being here today, making Locked On Ravens your first listen today. Be sure to make your second listen Locked On Fantasy Football, as they bring you all of the lineup insights, player insights that you need, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are fed 5 days a week here on Locked On Ravens. So if you want that daily Ravens coverage, we are here for you. Obviously, this is a big moment as the Ravens, they couldn't come up with the win, but I thought that they showed a lot of positives overall, some definite negatives. I thought there were some areas of concern. We'll talk about all that on tomorrow's show, and also some a little bit in the final part, but there were still some things that we need to get to. One of those being Isaiah Likely's comments, the other being Roquan Smith's comments, because both of those guys taunted Kansas City, called them out, whatever you want to say, definitely happened. So let's start off with Isaiah Likely. Oh, these were fighting words from Isaiah Likely. Obviously, he started, it was just the toe. They were a toe away from tying or potentially winning this game. And look, the Ravens would have gone for the win. John Harbaugh was very actively, holding up the two, going for the two. But obviously, Likely just a toe out of bounds. Just really, really tough stuff there. But Likely after the game had some very nice words for Kansas City fans that were, kind of heckling him. Fun fact, actually, spoiler alert, they were not actually nice words, Isaiah Likely said. But then to the media, Isaiah Likely, he kind of went scorched earth here, I'm not going to lie. He said, this is probably the worst game we're going to play all year. So if this is the best they've got, good luck in the postseason. Whew. I think a lot of the Ravens players are feeling a certain type of way about this game. I do. I probably wouldn't have put this one up if I was Isaiah Likely. I understand where he's coming from, right confidence in the team. But at the same time, this is clearly hey, you didn't play that well. We should have won this game type deal. And look, I admire the confidence. I do. And hey, you know what? Go talk your stuff, man. Talk your stuff. But the general response so far, maybe it changes, as this episode comes out. But the general response has been whoa. Saying that after a loss is kind of crazy. That's what the national response has been to this message. I personally don't have as big of an issue with it. I think it's kind of bold. I'm not going to lie. I think it is pretty bold. But, again, he Likely, after the game, he had 9 catches, 111 yards, a touchdown, almost again the game-winning score. If the Ravens had gone for 2 and made it there, man, he can talk. I mean, I guess if he wants to, but the Chiefs will certainly find that, and I'm sure put it on the bulletin board. And the Ravens have been pretty good about not doing like bulletin board stuff. Like obviously Roquan will say his stuff and like, his little phrases and metaphors and whatever, but that's not like this honestly transcends that a little bit. And like, this is a full direct like shot call out for Isaiah Likely here on the back-to-back champs. So, hey, you know what? It's a bold strategy. Could definitely pay off for him if it gets in their head enough, but they'd obviously have to rematch in the AFC Championship game to have that come to fruition to see. But man, Isaiah Likely really going after the Chiefs there with that one. And Roquan Smith going after the Chiefs too. Different way, not quite the way Isaiah Likely did it. But I mentioned on that what would have been a late hit out of bounds. It was not called. And there was obviously a lot of pushing and shoving on the sideline for that one. Roquan was asked about it, and he ended up saying, again, pretty bold words here from Roquan, but he ended up talking about he flopped. Called out Patrick Mahomes, said he flopped. That's why the referees didn't call it. That was a great no call by the ref, but whoever number 88 is, he better watch himself. He did a little slick push. I'll see him when I see him. And it was a player that the Chiefs just acquired. I can't remember. It's a tight end. I can't remember his name. Hendershot, I believe. I think it is Hendershot. Not in uniform. Ended up pushing Roquan, shoved him for hitting his quarterback. And, a lot of benches will, come to the defense of their quarterback. And you can see Roquan kind of pointing at him, kind of calling him out. So not necessarily shocked Roquan felt all fired up about that. Was a pretty late hit. I don't know. I mean, I was pretty shocked it wasn't called, especially because it's Mahomes. Like, I thought that was immediate, flag going up in the air, 15 yards. And then they got Marcus Williams on the other one that happened. But, man, I mean, you get shoved like that. First of all, there's a hit, and obviously your team's going to come to your defense. But, you end up having the call like that, and doesn't happen, makes the opposing team even more upset that it didn't happen. Then there's that other fire, and then you get a guy shoving you. So again, Roquan kind of tried to rub it in by saying, "No, I don't know who that guy is. When I see him, I'll see him. Right? When I see him, I'll see him." So yeah, a lot of fighting words here from the Ravens. I mean, again, it was a tough loss. It could have gone their way pretty easily. Claude fought their way back in, but there was a lot of displeasure, I felt like, from a lot of different areas in this game for the team, right? Officiating, we talked about some, I guess, disrespect stuff and some call-outs. Man, it's just, this post-game had everything, if we're being honest, and the game had everything too. Literally one of the better ways, like just taking Ravens Chiefs out of it. Like, just if you're an NFL fan, probably one of the better week one games you could have imagined. And again, I had said it all offseason. The NFL got it right by putting Ravens and Chiefs week one, opening up the season. And this game certainly had quite the amount of fireworks, just rivalry aspect. Like, this is beginning. Like, Lamar Mahomes, everybody loves those matchups. So again, the most that we can get in primetime under the spotlight, obviously you wish it goes the Ravens' way more than it has, but a lot of calling out on the Ravens side, and both referees to their opposing team. So very fiery post game for the Ravens. Coming up, though, in the final part of the show, we'll talk about some general week one takeaways, talk about what I saw during the game. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on this episode of Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by PrizePicks. And PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. So one Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on PrizePicks every week in September. That's right, only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 weeks of free W's. Don't miss the deal on PrizePicks because it's gone when September ends. And if you want to play alongside Drewski, Joe Budden, MMA champ Sugar Sean O'Malley, you can now find under the community plays, which is under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names of the PrizePicks community each week. So on PrizePicks, they have a ton of great things over there. Maybe for this Ravens Chiefs game, you went for more on the Isaiah Likely receiving yards. Maybe you went more on Lamar Jackson rushing yards. That could have paid off great for you on PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on PrizePicks. You get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. We're back. Our final segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher here with you on this Friday. Appreciate everybody for being here, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube for 5 days a week Ravens content. If you have a friend or a family member who is a Ravens fan, be sure to send them over our way on Locked On Ravens video form or audio form. If you're an audio listener, be sure to hit that follow button, subscribe button as well. We're creeping up on 8,000 subscribers in video form, and if you want to be a part of that goal for me, would really appreciate that if you haven't already. In audio form, our community grows every day, and we try to build that every single day as well. Social media, subtext, all the Locked On Ravens communities are incredible. We'll have a bonus episode coming tomorrow, also one on Sunday. The episode I recorded for today originally will be actually coming out on Saturday. So same shirt. I recorded them back-to-back. Recorded this one after I recorded the other one. But then we also have a ton of other Ravens content coming your way. Let's talk about generally Week 1 takeaways, Ravens and Chiefs. Ravens can't get the job done. Again, they end up losing 27-20. One of my biggest takeaways in this game is I really liked the fight the Ravens put up in this game. For me, it made me feel more confident in them outside of the offensive line stuff, which we'll get to in a couple minutes. But Baltimore could have easily just rolled over. Right, there are a couple of tough plays that don't go the offense's way. The defense has to come out there, short field against Patrick Mahomes and company. It's already, they're already putting up some points. And Ravens defense could have just been like, all right, it's the first game. It's Patrick Mahomes. It's Andy Reid. Oh, let's just save it. But that's never their mindset. That should never be their mindset. And I'm super proud of them that it's not. If there's a game you want to empty the tank in, you don't want to give all your stuff in week 1. You want to have a balanced effort for the season. But go all out every game. And that's what they did. They didn't roll over. They didn't lie down. And that's how they almost won this game. Is the Chiefs couldn't take advantage of the Ravens' mistakes because the Chiefs played sloppy themselves. And the Ravens were able to claw back into the game. The defense was able, again, you get a short field twice with Mahomes early on the strip sack with Roger Rosengarten. And then you also have the fourth down play that didn't work. And the Chiefs get the ball either at midfield or deep into Ravens territory. And instead of 2 touchdowns, you're looking at a 21-7 game. It's 2 field goals. That's 13-7. That's a huge difference. Massive difference. I think it gave the Ravens defense confidence after struggling a little bit early. And they certainly had their moments throughout the rest of the game. Obviously, in the secondary with Marlon Humphrey passing off Xavier Woods to nobody. That's a touchdown. But, man, Ravens overall kind of did their job in a lot of different aspects. Now, not every aspect. There are still plenty of mistakes. The offensive line, again, the blocking was not there. Some game plan stuff. The Ravens used 2 timeouts in the first 5 minutes of the third quarter. How good would it have been if they had those timeouts? There's just all this stuff that could have gone their way and that could have ended up having the final score go their way. But for a game in week 1, this was essentially their preseason as well, right? Because they didn't play their starters. The Chiefs did. So it's essentially it's not a tune-up game, but it's their first NFL action there. Because joint practices, it's not anything like, even preseason, it's not anything like a regular season game. So a lot of guys, they were kind of getting back in the groove of things. The Chiefs are a good team. It's a heck of a way to start off a season. Is going up against a really, really, really good team like that. Back-to-back champions. And I was expecting to feel one way about the game, but I honestly feel okay. Obviously, I'm upset they lost. I'm disappointed. There are all those emotions to go into this game. But I'm not necessarily season's over, season's done. I'm not like that. And obviously, I'm not going to react that way because it's week 1. And I'm not here to overreact to week 1. As I say a lot, and if you're an everydayer, you've heard me say this on the show. But when you talk about September losses, they don't matter in September, but they do matter in December. So when you're talking about a week 1 game, it doesn't define your season in September. You can still bounce back from it, but could harm you later down the line when you're talking about a conference tiebreaker, obviously head-to-head tiebreaker if the Ravens are going for seeding with the Chiefs in the AFC. So obviously not great, but I thought that the Ravens did a lot of good things. I thought Lamar Jackson, his decision making throughout the game, I thought was really good for the most part. Was taking checkdowns, finding open rushing lanes. I thought Justice Hill played well. Justice Hill, somebody that also was blocking Chris Jones. The Ravens said, "Hey, you know what? How are we going to combat Chris Jones on these final couple plays? Hey, we're going to put Justice Hill on him. Justice Hill, let's go." Look, that was crazy, and I was honestly sweating every time, and it didn't go as poorly as I thought. But obviously still not my number one choice there for the Ravens to go after Chris Jones. But that was the thing. Chris Jones wreaked havoc all night. The Ravens did not do well defending Rashee Rice in the middle of the field. They put him in the slot against Roquan, Malik Harrison, Trenton Simpson, who I thought played really well, was the only one to stop it. So again, it's a long season. It was tough to see Derrick Henry on the sideline as much as he was. Obviously, game flow kind of dictated Justice Hill, but I thought that they established enough early to where they could keep going with it. But the Ravens, again, like the AFC Championship game, kind of abandoned it a little bit, where Derrick Henry, 5 carries on that first drive. And everybody's talking about, well, all right, this is what we're waiting for, what we're going with. And then he ripped out some good runs. Lamar Jackson on the option plays, RPOs, whatever you want to call them. He was able to then work it to the outside because the Chiefs were starting to cheat in on the box, and the edge defender, who's responsible for setting the edge, making that decision, was going towards Derrick Henry. So we've talked about this all offseason on Locked On Ravens. Lamar Jackson just takes that around. And so if they had done that more often, I think that they could establish it. But then it kind of got to the point where they had to abandon it. And that's what we talked about in the AFC Championship game, where they still could have worked with it. But Derrick Henry had 5 carries on that first drive and had 8 total for the rest of the game. 13 total carries for Derrick Henry. Didn't think the run blocking was that great overall. I mean, Henry had a guy on top of him, it seemed like, a lot of the time. But again, I think you try to work him in there a little bit because it was tough. The Ravens paid Derrick Henry a good amount of money for a running back in today's game, $16 million up to 20. And he was sitting on the sideline in the biggest moment of the game. So that was tough. I mean, it's Isaiah Likely, again, can't talk about him enough. Finding his spots, getting open. Lamar's security blanket, short, intermediate, deep, 3 levels for him. Mark Andrews, they used them together. Chiefs were definitely keying in on Mark Andrews a little bit, but that's to Isaiah Likely's benefit. Rashad Bateman made a really, really clutch catch late in the game. Zay Flowers was, being a menace to the Chiefs defense. I thought that defensively, other players had moments. Adefe Owe, David Ajabo, and Travis Jones ended up combining for a sack early in that game with Mahomes that kind of kept the Ravens in the game. So all this different stuff. I mean, I talk about Zach Orr, right? Can't give him enough praise. I'll continue to talk about him. There were some, again, Harbaugh, Monken, definitely some good and bad. But that's the same thing. Even for Zach Orr was good and bad. But I feel better about this game than I thought I would if they lost, because of the fight they showed. They didn't give up. It wasn't one of those games where it felt like they had, kind of thrown in the towel on a week 1 regular season game. They went out there and at least fought and were very close. And it was a toe. It was literally a toe. And the Ravens could have won the game. So got to give credit to Lamar on that final drive. Obviously, he did miss a couple of guys late. That is not good. The deep passing game also was off. Would love to see the Ravens work more vertically. That was talked about in the live show chat, and we had a conversation about that. Seemed like they were going a lot of east-west, not north. You may hope to go north in that situation on the field. So I hope that the Ravens can work in that more over the next couple of weeks. But Ravens lose 27-20, start the season 0-1, but plenty to take away. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Coming up tomorrow, we will have a bonus episode. Again, it's the episode I recorded initially for today, but this episode obviously took precedent. So be sure to stay tuned for that. I'll see you right back here tomorrow in the same shirt, because I recorded it twice here tonight on Locked On Ravens.